So I graduated in '07 from Harvard University with a degree in visual and environmental studies. I made arcade consoles with specific pieces of art in them as my thesis. So I was sort of primed and ready to go to work at Harmonix. I had both my hardware and my software experience. And I also had a little bit of CHI experience. Drew, who has talked previously, is sitting right over there, and I made a project called Tug and Talk. I was taking a class at MIT Media Lab. It was actually alt.chi, but it was called Tug and Talk. We had a tangible belt buckle that you could tug through the wireless internet. So I come to game design with a somewhat academic background, and also just a focus on all sorts of interactivity. So just to give you a little brief history of what Harmonix has been doing in the world of video game peripherals. Back in 2003, we made a game called Karaoke Revolution. There were like 8 in that series. After that, 2005, the big hit Guitar Hero. Quickly transitioned into Rock Band. And then big release in 2010, Rock Band 3 and Dance Central. Throughout the Rock Band 2 and 3 phases, I did a lot of hardware designs for Harmonix, improving usability of all the peripherals and doing some early designs for all of the real instruments that will teach you how to play guitar, keyboards, drums. And I did all of the initial prototyping for the game that would become Dance Central. When we began the process of making a dance game, we actually had no idea about Kinect. And we're playing around with all sorts of different sensors. So as a resident hardware designer, I was required or instructed to check out all sorts of different tech and start to develop a dance game. That quickly transitioned into software design, and in 2011 we'll be shipping Dance Central 2. I just got back from E3. I am presently the lead designer on this title. Really excited about it. It's a pretty energizing E3, and some people got engaged to be married on our stage, which was kind of crazy. So Harmonix has a lot of history with putting plastic in your living room. And so do a lot of other companies. The Stick, I think, is one of the early novel controllers. It's a early Atari joystick that controlled with a mercury tilt sensor. No power required. You can see in the center that's a Steel Battalion controller. That thing will take up your entire living room. It has a button for every function in the game. To the right is the Novint Falcon. It's a 6 degree of freedom interactive device. You know, I always want to put something scatological in my presentation. So Sega has recently released the Toylet, which reminded me of a MIT Media Lab project from a few years ago, which you'll see below. You're in control. You are and control are sort of a theme of this talk. So when most of our video game fans see this kind of stuff come out on the internet, they're a little cynical about it. They say, oh, Kinect is just the Sega Activator rehashed. The Power Pad and the Wii Balance Board are essentially the same thing. The Power Glove and the Wiimote, the Kinect and the Activator. And perhaps they are simply a little jaded by the marketing.
There's an upper level for arm movements and a lower level for leg movements. You are the controller. Penetrate the invisible beams to activate a move. Withdraw to clear or reactivate. With the speed of light, every punch, every kick, every move you make instantly results in an on-screen action. You are the controller. Connectimals.
So 2 very different products, 2 very different time periods, same promise. You are the controller. We're going to get rid of these things that are binding you up, that are getting in your way, that are frustrating you, that are ruining your interaction with our fun computational system. And I look at products like this and I say, well, challenge accepted. Let's take a look at the affordances of this piece of tech and let's build something transformative. Let's build something new. Let's build something great. So I like to think about the kinds of things that all these different peripherals afford us. And if I could talk directly to those cynics on the internet, I would tell them there's just no comparison between Kinect and the Activator. You have 8 slightly leveled infrared interrupters versus a depth camera with robust skeleton tracking. And the types of games you can make in those contexts are completely different. I like to think about, would there even be a fun Activator game that you could make? And in a lot of ways, the Activator is sort of one of the more problematic peripherals. Its development was not in concert with any particular games or any game designer. So it's this hardware developed in a vacuum to work with almost anything, and as a result, sort of work with nothing. PowerPad, you're going from 12 4-buttons to the Wii balance board with 4 strain gauges, very sensitive to fluctuations, high resolution interface. What we all love, the Power Gloves. I think the famous line from The Wizard is, "I love the Power Glove, it's so bad." Ultrasonic motion detection. This is one of my earliest video gaming memories, is playing around with this thing and like having desperately wanted it and being horribly disappointed. So I can see what the cynical perspective is on a lot of inviting this plastic into your living room, but I think there's a lot of potential in the affordances of these various things. The Wiimote has transformed all sorts of things, not only gaming, but the sort of live VJing stuff. Everyone has a Wiimote in their rig at this point, wagging it around to control this or that. And as I started looking through some Chi-related papers and research to try and give a talk that's a little more academically focused, given that I've been really focused on commercial products for like 4 years. I started digging into reactions to a lot of these peripherals and starting to see what people were saying about them. And this is if we could see it a little better, I might be able to. Yeah. So this is an ISO pointing comparison between a classic controller, a mouse, and a Wiimote. And some more soft metrics about the exact nature of this device. And as I started digging into this research, I started coming across some particularly frustrating and problematic things. It seems that when new devices get released, there's a sort of immediate reaction, sort of glowy-eyed reaction among researchers, and they're like, "Oh my God, I want to say something about this. I want to say that this is the next big thing." And so, reading this particular paper about the Nintendo DS and its unique affordances with its touchscreen controls, and they're talking about this game, Trauma Center Under the Knife. In Trauma Center, you act like a surgeon and you suture wounds, and the quote is, this game would not be possible without an interface like this to allow players accurate, realistic control. And to that I say, oh really? We have a game that predates Trauma Center by 10, 12 years. These things offer unique ways to interact with content, but when people want to make games, they make games about anything. I remember sitting in my grade school computer lab playing Operation Frog, because the real things were a little too messy. So there's this extraordinary positivism, like at the early part of the 2000s, about gesture, and these broad sweeping statements about how players would prefer to control activities through gestures. They hate their joysticks, they hate their mice. And modern researchers, contemporary researchers saying, we don't notice the controller. It's basically not there until it's broken. It's become an extension of our hands. And people who've played games with traditional format controllers for a long time will all tell you this. Like, you don't think much about it once you're used to it. So dug into this one particular paper, and it's about a Harmonix product, so I had a particular eye towards it. Interesting paper. It's trying to figure out, is the body being implicated in the game an important thing? Does that change the way we interact with it? Does it increase our immersion? Does it increase our engagement? And so they did something absolutely crazy. They decided to take a guitar game that was also compatible with the PS2 controller. My apologies for an Xbox controller being in there. And had some players play with the guitar and some players play with the PS2 controller. And then they found interesting things. So people are having more fun on the guitar and not on the controller. But we're not sure that that's all that's here. So we have a mechanic in our guitar games where when you want to deploy super-powered overdrive, you tilt your guitar up. And so they took one group of people who had never played the game and didn't tell them about that feature. And another group of people and told them about that feature, and then came to this conclusion. Our main finding is that body movements appear not only to increase players' level of engagement, but also to modify the way they get engaged. The combined results demonstrate, in fact, that the controller itself plays a critical role in creating a more complete experience. By inducing body movement, the device resulted in a higher sense of engagement in players and mediated a feeling of presence in a digital world. And they have this neato graph of all the different elements that create this feeling of engagement, presence, flow, the things you really want to get out of games. I look at this and I'm like, so you made a bowl of soup, and then you gave a bunch of people forks, and found out, okay, actually, using forks makes soup less tasty, and meanwhile, there's some designer who's invented a spoon, and you've taken that spoon away. And so looking at the paper and reading through it, it's one of these strange things where it's not simply the player's movement, it's not simply their body, it's the design of the thing. The controller and the software were designed hand in hand and are meant to be used together. These mechanics are refined, and we do research. We put these things together to make very specific experiences. So to see universal metrics of fun reflecting that when you take away things we've worked very hard on, the game is not as fun, I think has no way to prove this body movement and engagement. And I think it's a strong push that people want to make for a particular focus on gaming, but I think it's problematic in more ways than one. So working on Dance Central was a particularly interesting experience for me. I hadn't really done a game design project before. I did a lot of interesting prototyping, which I may be able to show you guys in a bit, depending on how long this goes. But one of our biggest challenges was designing a menu system and its interactions. So I'll just show you a brief video of what the menus are like in Dance Central in case you haven't had a chance to get them. So in the top left, that's a superimposed video of someone using the interface. You have a single axis interface with a hard swipe across the bottom.
So this one is better because there's less option here. As in, I'm only moving in one axis, if you like. So I know it doesn't matter where my arm is, I'm still moving on that one axis, which is a lot easier than moving in.
Only the top two work, so
I like that too. That's really satisfying because you're rather than dragging it somewhere.
So this research firm did a whole bunch of research on all the different Connect menus and came out, saying across all the different ways that they were judging this menu system that it had totally succeeded. And so our UI designer, the guy who we were working closely with to build all this stuff, left a comment on his page and said, really happy. Our conclusions are about the same, and I figured that out while I'm making it. And the guy says, well, it was great to hear that you reached the same conclusions during your research. I guess the point I'm trying to get to is that in a lot of cases, the designer's intent and the marriage between the hardware and software are a lot of what is magical about these products. It's a lot of what makes them differentiated, and it's difficult to separate the affective qualities from those interactions. And the best games designed for any particular peripheral or games that are designed from the ground up with that peripheral. And ultimately, any of these big changes, this removing a physical controller, this freedom, whatever else, it doesn't offer you much unless the designers make use of the new affordances. And the affordances of each one of these pieces of technology are incredibly specific. So then I found a paper that I thought was particularly interesting, very recent, and along a similar line. And it started defining terms, which made me really happy. I love defining terms. So we have a few different types of controller mappings, these conceptual concepts of how we're going to take the interactions you're having in the game world and map them onto a physical interface. So they say directional natural mapping. You push forward and you go forward. You push left and you go left. This is a natural mapping. Kinesthetic natural mapping. So you don't have a tangible object, but you're acting with your body in a way that you would in another context. You're pretending to play a guitar, you're pretending to swat flies. And a realistic, tangible, natural mapping. It's a delicious one. You're interacting with something that represents the thing on screen almost one-to-one. And reading through all of these various papers, you rarely come across anything that takes into account some of the great things that have happened with the controller. And so rather than rehash to you what has already been, I think, said in the CHI community, I want to look at a particular set of case studies around that. And I think the most interesting thing was from this paper was this particular conclusion, which is more or less that people get used to things, and getting used to things is tantamount to natural. And they're questioning the novelty effect of these controllers and saying, is there longevity here, or are the standard controller interface paradigms going to win out in the end? And so, in defining terms, if there are two things that I could remove from the discourse of design, the first one would be the word intuitive, and the second would be the word natural. I think these two terms are particularly insulting to our user base. They say, oh, if you don't get it, well, something's wrong with you, because this is a natural interface. This is an intuitive interface. And I think those are undefinables. They're unachievables. We can't push after intuitive. We can't push after natural. But I'd like to say that we can push after, at least in games, symmetry. Coincident input-output, congruence, consistency. Predictability, ultimately, of what the interaction is going to be like. And I think these types of goals are the things that we sort of force on ourselves as we're building new controller-based experiences, new camera-based experiences. And so we're using the affordances to try and create the symmetry, create the coincidence, create the congruence, and make a tight feeling of connection between the interaction you're having in the world and the interaction that's happening on screen. With things like Dance Central, it's pretty easy. There really are no controllers, and that's great because when you're dancing, you don't have any controllers. With things like Rock Band, it makes a lot of sense to have your guitar in your hand, or you're playing your drums with your sticks, because that's a lot more fun than beating around on a controller in that context. However, controllers have a long and storied history. I think one of the most notable changes over the course of all of these various console standards happens right here with N64. You have the introduction of the analog stick. And then the case studies that I'm going to look at, one of them deals very closely with novel uses of the analog stick. This had been around since Nintendo 64, so we're talking about 97. One of the most popular game systems among my peers, and it really allowed for Miyamoto to make his 3D Mario, to have an interaction that could allow you to navigate freely and subtly in a 3D world. So before he got to doing that, he was messing around with this thing, and the other protagonist in our story, Kuru Tsunoda, the guy behind Kinect, and has a little pre-story to that. There's a sort of interesting linkage between these two guys that I want to sort of pull out. So Miyamoto, one of the first games that he worked on was Punch-Out, and his goal was to make a game that utilized zooming. He had a new piece of silicon that would allow you to take particular sets of pixels and scale them up 1.5 times. And they were super excited about this technology, and they were like, what will we make? And somehow they decided that a boxing game made sense, because you could have, just one player on screen, and they would get a little bit bigger as they punched. And on the other side, we have Kudo. Years and years later, the boxing genre is now storied and gone through multiple iterations. And he says, I want to relaunch boxing. I want to make a great new game. I want to have people have direct control over the fists of their boxers, and I want to get rid of the standard paradigm of just pushing different buttons and different combos to get the effect that I'm looking for. So over on Miyamoto's side, they start making the game, and a member of Miyamoto's team says this amazingly prescient thing. He says, I think we should make the interface like a glove. And Miyamoto says, as someone who plays video games, I don't like ambiguous interfaces or things that are hard to figure out. So we're going to use a joystick and buttons. We're going to make it as easy as possible. So this is just such a perplexing thought that the man who's going to be holding a Wiimote in just a few slides is thinking at the time, like, it's intuitive to have a controller. It's intuitive to have buttons. And I think that shows a little bit the fallacy of this concept of intuitiveness. It's a temporal thing. It's not any more deeply rooted than that. And Kudo, on the other side, is realizing that these analog sticks offer such a great affordance. They not only have the ability to be moved around, but they also have a sort of springy nature to them. You can flick them around, you can move them in all sorts of different directions, and you don't have to simply use them for that directional navigation. You can also use them for gesture. And we often think of gesture as being limited only to these motion interfaces and this emergent thing that's happened in just a very short period of time. But back in 2004, Kudo's realizing the potential for gesture on these controllers. So if we look at Punch-Out as a game and as a set of controls, it's relatively simple. It's a puzzle game masquerading as a boxing game. So all the different fighters that you fight, and we can watch a little bit of Punch-Out. I'll turn off the sound, talk over it. But all the different boxers that you fight have their own special patterns, and you, as Little Mac, are hanging out and trying to figure out each one of these boxers' patterns so that you can do your block at the right time, do your punch at the right time, and that's sort of the core basis of the game, is figuring out as each new fighter comes out how you're going to figure out their pattern so you can beat them, get on to the next, and eventually beat Mike Tyson. On the other side, the controls become the back-of-the-box feature. When we're making games, we often talk about what are we going to put in the back of the box. What are our top-tier things? And then, the language that Kudo developed with his team, eventually called Total Punch Control. And so we can watch a little bit of a video that will hopefully you can read that language. But the tooltip is instructing you to flick the right analog stick of the controller to the right, flick it to the left to control the boxer's left and right arms, and a long switch for a hook and all the way back and around for an uppercut. So you have these nice little simple gestures that people can perform with their thumbs on interfaces that they're already familiar with that change the experience of playing a boxing game from a very simple intentional button press to a more complex gesture. And this is a game that is ultimately trying to make an immersive boxing experience. Punch-Out is not quite a boxing experience. It is at its core a puzzle experience and has its own affordances. So if you compare the two control schemes, the core of the thing is relatively the same. You block, you hit, you duck, but in one case, you're trying to offer the player a whole bunch more choice through gestural control, and on the other case, you're trying to limit the amount of choices so you can build nice puzzles around your fighters. So both of these games have progressed into the modern day, and a Wii Punch-Out came out, I think, just 2 years ago. And the lead on that game said, I think that the puzzle mechanics we have are really great. So, why would we mess with the Wii version? Why would we mess with the Wii version? We need to copy what the NES did, and the game doesn't need anything new. It needs a bit of a graphical update. And on the other side, Kudo in post interviews has said, we left button controls in. You know, you can play the game with just your triggers and your analog sticks, but we left the button controls in for people who really wanted them. And in retrospect, I wish that I'd just gotten rid of them, because you put a Dvorak keyboard on someone's desk right next to a QWERTY keyboard, and I know which one they're going to go for, even though in the long run, they might be better off with Dvorak. And it might offer them a more fun experience, but people have their own sort of predilections. Meanwhile, Fight Night has sort of increased and multiplied its gestural language over the analog sticks, and this gestural language has leaked into pretty much all of the EA Sports titles. So, an NHL 07.
NHL 07 by EA Sports. New to NHL 07 is the EA Sports Skill Stick. The Skill Stick gives you more control over your players than ever before. Here are the basics for the EA Sports Skill Stick. To skate your player around the ice, use the left stick. The left stick acts as your skates. Let's move on to the right stick. So if the left stick is your skates, think of the right stick as your player's hockey stick.
So with that basic metaphor of saying, okay, like one of these things is more or less your feet, and the other thing is more or less your stick, it takes this notion that we have often in first-person shooters, where one stick is your way of looking around and one stick is your way of moving, and says, actually, no, we're going to map that in a physical way to the player. And NHL 07 and the subsequent NHL games are definitively the most popular hockey titles. And another interesting example of this is the game Skate. Around the time that Skate came out, there was a very popular celebrity-endorsed...
The experience of skateboarding is a very physical feeling, and that's what we wanted to capture in playing this game. And by using the sticks, you capture that feeling and you're driving something that's physical in the game. When you're playing the game, your left stick, that's your body. So you're steering left and right, pulling it back to get into power slides, push forward, your guy will crouch. And then your right stick, that controls your board. So I'm gonna pull back, crouch for a little bit to get ready for a big ollie, and then flick it forward. That's why it's called Flick It, because you do flick the stick forward. It's that simple. And
so the metaphor's a little bit broken. You know, your board and you are in a complicité. Like, the board doesn't have a will of its own. That said, the board moves in particular patterns and particular tricks, and you can mimic those tricks with gestures on the analog stick. So as I was saying earlier, before I interrupted myself for the video, there was a very popular franchise at the time, Tony Hawk, Pro Skater. Had been many iterations, and it was sort of a very button-based experience. And Skate was able to outsell that experience, largely based on the popular reception of these controls and the popular belief that they represented a much more exciting experience of skateboarding and a much more free experience of skateboarding. So going back to our Miyamoto and our Kudo, Miyamoto says this sort of strange thing at the end of this interview about Punch-Out. He says, you know, like, I think of my role as trying to fit in the current era and to translate that into the present style. He acknowledges, you know, that this revolutionary notion of having boxing gloves control your boxer wasn't right for the times in his mind, and that he's not really someone who's trying to think in the future. He's trying to define the present. And Kudo, looking back on Fight Night, is saying, you know, I wish that Kinect had been around. You know, he's sort of the big brand representation for Kinect and has been pushing for a lot of that stuff. And he feels like, you know, the ultimate would be to get rid of the controller. He buys into this gestural thing. And so it's sort of a confusing place to be. You have these two very storied icons who've gone through the process of making these interactive boxing experiences and ending in a very different place. When Miyamoto and his team are being interviewed about making Punch-Out for the Wii, they hardly mention motion controls. It seems very much like something that they added to the game as something that was forced on at the end, and not sort of what's core to the game, what the puzzle aspects are. And on the opposite side, you have someone who's been pushing hard to make controllers do things that they couldn't do before, who's ready to throw them out the window. So designers are a perplexing sort, I think, is what you can take from that. Keita Takahashi is the creator of a game called Katamari and also a game called Nobi Nobi Boy. These were very popular games for PlayStation 2 and I guess Nobi Nobi Boy less so for PlayStation 3. and they made wonderful use of dual analog sticks. But around GDC 06, he was interviewed, and it was just like, basically said that the Wiimote was Nintendo pushing too hard, was insisting on design from designers, and that he really didn't like that and didn't respect that. He didn't think controllers should play that much of a role in that process. And then 3 years later at GDC, he's talking about his game Nobi Nobi Boy. And in Nobi Nobi Boy, you control this infinitely stretching little worm guy. One of your sticks is his head, and one of your sticks is his butt. And he decided that he didn't want the offset layout of Xbox 360 controller, despite the fact that they coded the whole thing in it. They ported it all to PS3 for that analog stick symmetry. So I think the mercurial nature of people's interactions with these interfaces sort of defines a flexibility of design that, and I guess ultimately reflects particular intentionalities at different points in time in designers and dev team cycles. So I want to sort of end with and move on to the generic touchscreen controller and talk a little bit about the lessons that we can learn from these analog stick-based interfaces in light of these sort of almost tactile-less anything machines that we all carry around in our pockets. So we throw around the word intuitive, we throw around the word natural a lot around this device. I think more about this device than any device I've ever seen. And just looking at it as a gaming platform, Angry Birds is easily one of the most popular mobile games of all time. And it doesn't have any of these particular physical qualities. It's not implicating your body in any particular way, but it's very immersive, it's very fun, but it doesn't have the standard feedback systems. And I think in these instances, what compels me is the freedom of a touchscreen space, and the freedom of a touchscreen space to be gestural. And I think we often think of controllers as being bound in, but I think they ultimately have the same flexibility and potential for gestural input. And as long as your metaphors with your touchscreen are reflective of things that you can understand. Here you have a slingshot and a bird. With cut the rope, you have ropes and you slice them with your finger. It's ultimately the mechanic that brings in the player, that makes the player excited to interact with the thing. And the device itself almost disappears. And I think if we look back at this sort of symmetry, coincident I/O, congruence, consistency, I guess the thing that I want to say is that, as much as designed experiences for particular controllers have been able to invite a whole bunch of people into gaming, and despite the optimism that we had about things like the Wii, and despite the optimism we have about things like Kinect, we're able to see these same types of interactions happen in interfaces that are relatively generic, that don't have all the unique corporal affordances of the technologies that have sort of been battered around in the community as the height of interactivity. So that's pretty much where I'm at. It's a talk in progress, and I would love to entertain questions or comments about it. I don't know quite how much time that took. Okay. Yeah.
Well, maybe it's not a question. I don't know. So back to Miyamoto and Tsunoda and the boxing story. Miyamoto's the guy who said, I don't really like that three-corner gesture stuff. I think that doesn't give you a sense of confidence. You really nailed that in the end by driving it back to your four principles. The gist of it, I think, is the fact that you can see the effect of what you did, even if you are in this loosey-goosey analog space. And that was something I was already thinking about because I'm trying to understand gesture and natural language communication. And for that, I thought I needed to know about American Sign Language. You can't presently get a straight answer either from native scientists or from sign linguists about whether there are analog dimensions to ASL. ASL is a language of symbols, like English is a language of symbols. And there are places where you think analog features could be built in. In fact, signers, if you ask them about this, they're really hesitant because they know they're in loosey-goosey space. But when they communicate, the important thing is their effect on the other person. They can see what their effect is on the other person. So they can forget in their performance about the loosey-goosey nature of the medium because they're going all the way to this observable response. And I think that's what Miyamoto missed. He said, I feel this uncomfortable loosey-goosey thing, and he wasn't able to say, well, if I make it into a visible hard output, then it'll be okay. And so I guess that is more of a comment than a question, but...
It's interesting.
I do have actually a question.
Yeah.
There are people who criticize cell phone interfaces. Nielsen in particular, who's a big fat usability guy, says cell phone interfaces these days are so lousy because they break all these rules that we know from before in usability. But you're getting a quantum effect of people adopt cell phones, they adopt the world of cell phones, before they use cell phones. To me, the most striking example is you stop an application with a cell phone by turning off the cell phone or getting a call. There's this big interruption thing that you would never tolerate in other forms of software. So it's a whole new generation, a whole new technology. People accept a lot of things in that world that they don't in the old world. And I think that that's going to be true in your games for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitively the case. Talking to a lot of the developers around Connect and their menu interfaces, I tried to bring up the concept of gorilla arm, and people looked at me like I had a gorilla arm. Like capacitive touchscreens have been a potential, and resistive touchscreens and IR interrupting touchscreens have been something we've been able to do for a long time. But people mounted them like televisions, trying to use them all day, and your arm is tired as all hell. And I think a lot of the other competing menu interfaces for Connect end up being these things where you're holding your arm out a lot like this for a really long time, and it's very fatiguing. It's something we know to be fatiguing, and something that novelty sort of erases. And I think it's probably a very similar effect that the cell phone has, and it'll be refined, but the novel affordances are such that we accept it.
I'm interested in these for principles as an alternative or improvement on intuitiveness. And I can guess at the meetings, but I wondered if you'd take Angry Birds and talk about how it does or doesn't. It has or doesn't have examples of these.
Okay, yeah, that's a nice challenge. So I think the clearest and most fun thing about Angry Birds is coincident I/O. You're pulling back and you're letting go, and you've made an input and you get a coincident, predictable output. In the same right, your birds act in consistent manners. So there are a few different types of your birds. They're going to knock down things. They're going to have that sort of effect. I think likewise. Symmetry is a little bit harder in that instance because it's not an avatar-based representation. Like you are a god that makes one decision. So oftentimes I think of symmetry as being the reflection of you in the interface, and the symmetrical nature of that interaction. Congruence, I think, is a tough one because I consider that sort of the most broad of all the things. I think it wraps in some conceptual things that are probably as problematic as intuitive, but it's its own synonym for symmetry. But in my particular vernacular, I like to think of congruence as being the consistent layout and consistent interaction across the various modalities of a given interface. So for a game-based example, as we're trying to create menu systems that are going to interact with a guitar, interact with a set of drums, or menu systems that are going to interact with your gesture, making that stuff congruent so that if you have interacted with a menu system on a guitar, that a lot of the same concepts that you have learned there are going to be applicable on a secondary interface.
Nice presentation. Did you say something about having some prototypes you could show us? Do we have time? Do you have plenty of time?
Yeah. I can show you some of the Dance Central prototyping process. This was fun. Yeah, my apologies that the previous thing is a bit stream of consciousness, but I think I'm still getting to what the core of what I want to say is. So I'll skip the part where I introduce myself and tell you that I work on Dance Central. So to retcon a bit, we decided to make a dance game. I'll gloss over this stuff, but we saw a lot of dancing culture, a lot of music that we wanted to incorporate into the game, and a lot of stuff we didn't know. And so the concepts that we went through were more or less to refine this sort of broad possibility space offered by a real dance game and refine it over the course of multiple weeks. So as I said earlier, we were really unsure about our tech. We have no idea about detection, and one of the big things that we refined was our audience. We really, in the beginnings of making Dance Central, we had no idea if our game was for novices, dancers, or for basically everybody. Likewise, we had no idea about move complexity and how that would fare in our game. Nor was our visual language particularly well thought out, and we had no real idea of what a feedback system would be like, and we knew that if we were going to make a real dance game, it was going to be tutorial heavy, but that was going to be a hard design challenge. So myself and the awesome dudes from Firehose Games, who made a really great game that's out on PlayStation Network, went about prototyping some things. Quickly, as we were prototyping, we had not decided on our tech. We used a proprietary body-mounted sensor solution system for these investigations. And a lot of times our detection was actually just me or another one of the guys on the team like pushing a button telling you whether you're good behind your back. We sort of have a scrappy attitude at Harmonix, which is available to us because we have a lot of keen eyes on the team, and we can oftentimes see good gameplay despite a lot of fakery. So if we look at other dance games and their tech and detection, it's relatively rote. Their audience is pretty much everybody. Their move complexity is incredibly limited. Their language is also incredibly limited. The feedback systems are right on the interface itself, and given that they are so easy, they rarely have a tutorial experience. But if we look at real dance, the thing we're trying to achieve, its tech is pretty low tech. It's a dance studio with a giant mirror. Detection is your teacher. Your audience is mostly people who've committed to taking dance class every week. And your move complexity varies everything from the most simple step to start your routine to, step 3, whatever the hell that is. Language was I think one of the biggest challenges that we overcame with Dance Central. This is a common, or the most common dance notation that you see to the left, and it defines the movement you see on the right. And you can see why video is the best tool for capturing dance. Again, your feedback. Sorry about that. Again, your feedback system is your teacher as well, and your tutorial is why you're there. So now I can show you some cool video prototypes. The first thing we made was really simplistic. Mostly we were just trying to like get excited about it and see what the low bar was to an extent. Like could we create some icons and could people follow them in real time? So we had a very limited set of icons. I think there was like 6 moves: step forward, step back. And you know, we're at low move complexity. Our language is unbelievably limited. Yeah, just these 6 moves. And we hadn't had any detection or feedback working at this point, and we taught people what these icons meant before we played. So having had that experience, we decided that that was really not approaching real dance, and it was really unsustainable to try and imagine a system where we could just invent icons that people would be able to read immediately. So we decided if we're going to get into this and really try it, we should take a look at some real popular dance crazes and see what we can make that could teach Cupid Shuffle, or teach those dance crazes, in this case, Cupid Shuffle. So on the left of the screen, you'll see the sort of floating arms and legs. Those are our proprietary sensors tracking the player. On the right, Elmo is dancing the Cupid Shuffle. It was actually the choreographer that we'd hired, but we lost the video. So,
News down, down, do you dare, do you we got a brand new dance. Do you dare, do you dare? News down, down, do you dare, do you dare? Now let me down, down, do you dare, do you dare?
So we have this sort of scrolling queuing system. It's beginning to look a little bit like what Dance Central eventually looked like. And we're pretty happy with this system because we just name something and make someone do it on screen, and all of a sudden it's a move in the game. So like we can really make you do almost anything. We settled on this language that was partially inspired by, of all things, the Hannah Montana
shuffle
movie.
With your left foot, polka dotted. Is that right?
Yes.
Zombie claw walk.
Or
zombie claws. Ooh. Have your claws out and get ready to walk 4 steps on your right foot. 1, 2, 3, 4.
So in watching videos like this, they're really memorable, and we found that being able to name moves in cute and exciting ways actually help people learn the dances a little bit better. We have these little text prompts that are a precursor to our spotlight feedback, and again, our tutorial we didn't really try and deal with in the game experience quite yet. So looking at that, it was fun and interactive, and it could teach you all sorts of dance, but it really wasn't approaching a game. It was more like an interactive DVD. So we stepped a little bit closer to the side of real dance, of a real game, and built up that queuing system and tried to make a more game-like feedback system. So the prototype, or this is sexy back.
I'm bringing sexy back. Yeah. The mother boys don't know how to act. Yeah. I'm thinking special, what's behind your back.
And so, all through this, we're realizing that what we're making is a game about proprioception, and that in a lot of cases, your representation on screen is distracting to your proprioception because it's not necessarily doing the right thing, but the person on screen is always doing the right thing. Likewise, we're trying to get a nice queuing system that's glanceable, because in order to really do great real-time proprioception, you need to have your eyes locked on the dancer. So we're still at high move complexity here. Our language is limited in its own right, but has evolved to give you a little look of what you've done previously and a look of what's next. Likewise, our feedback system's rolled into that same place, and we have your on-screen representation. Each one of these little bubbles sort of fills up as you do a move correctly. And we actually built what was a beginnings of a tutorial system. So you'd have a chance to check out each one of the moves and try it out in your body a few times before you actually got to the dance part of the linear part of the dance performance. So this was a early start towards what would become something that we call Break It Down, which is a robust game-like tutorial system that we ended up shipping with. One of the other artifacts of this tutorial was that we had moves that lasted different lengths. Some moves were 4 beats long, some moves were 8 beats long, and we found over time that consistent move length was going to be a top priority for us. We needed that. People needed that roller, that tumbler, to move at a consistent length. So we had a little crisis at this point, or I guess just a change in direction. We felt like we had this audience, and we'd refined a little bit more. We'd said, okay, there are these dancers, there's willing non-dancers, and then there are these people who would get down to play our prototype who just won't play it. They look at it and they're like, I'm not doing that. And they don't want to go through a tutorial. And so we said, hey, we're prototyping, like, let's try and make something that maybe those people would play. So we made this thing that's sort of like a rock band for your body in a way. It's a 100% call and response, and it sends these gems down a tunnel at you to do each move. So you can take a look at that. So the pops that are happening are representative of you getting each one of those gems, and you're facing your dance teacher, and she is doing moves maybe up to about 4 bars in a row. And we found that the maximum number of bars of dance that someone can keep in their head at once in a tutorial system was about 4. Which ended up being the way we implemented our break it down. So our problems with this was that it was really two-dimensional. There's no real ability to have a representation of Z depth in the game. There's no ability to do much more than this sort of two-dimensional, almost semaphore style of dancing. So that was a little disheartening, but we had embraced these the non-willing dancers. We kept our move name language because we felt like that was one of the big strengths. But we had this whole new visual language and timing cues and the whole tunnel, very reminiscent of other Harmonix projects. And our feedback system was rolled right into that with those red X's or green pops. And we'd succeeded at making something that didn't have a tutorial, but we'd failed at making something that made you dance. So we took a look at our audience and we said, oh, you don't want to dance? Well, we don't want you. I think this is a really important thing to do when trying to create a product that's supposed to appeal to everybody, it's supposed to appeal to all ages. I think you have to say at a certain point, like you have to want to interact with the product. You have to have a willingness. And this actually freed us up to make the game that we made. I think we would have tried a lot of other crazy ideas about like dodging asteroids and other crazy stuff that we were throwing around at that time if we hadn't just been willing to say, who cares? So we underwent our probably most difficult choreographic burden. This actually ended up shipping with Dance Central, this song, not this interface. Soulja Boy's Crank That, probably the most popular dance craze of the last decade. Around this time in our prototyping process, a lot of the artists at the company who were at that point, I think, working on Beatles Rock Band were saying, if we're going to make a dance game, we should have like highlighted trails that you trace, and that should be your cueing system and feedback system. And a lot of us on the team were really suspicious of the concept, but one of the nice things about prototyping is that you can get questions like that out of the way before you're actually in development, and if you can prove them out one way or the other, you can win people over to your side so that they don't continue to grind the axe through the rest of development. So you can see just with these few sets of moves that like the footprints on the ground and the trails behind the player's body and all these attempts at cueing the player are pretty much failing because they're like coincident in space. Every once in a while you have these Superman moves which seem to be relatively communicated by those trails, but we thought that this 3D system was almost as limiting as the previous 2D system. So we didn't even play test this one, we just sort of moved away and had a regroup about our language and decided that we needed some visual iconography that people could relate to and some directionality so that we could have moves that go to the left, moves that go to the right, and now you've learned 2 moves for the price of 1 sort of thing. And a little bit more immediate feedback. So this is just a little bit of gameplay from that prototype. So we have each one of these icons represents a beat or move, and if you turn gold, you got it. Quarter note moves have 4 icons. Moves of the rest have just a little empty spot, and this went really well. People reacted really positively to it, and we felt like we'd come across something that had that instantaneous consistent feedback that a game really needs to have to keep you hooked, and was also not too intrusive. We also mounted a more explicit tutorial here and created this concept we have of verb arcs. So in the Dance Central tutorial, every beat has an associated word. So if you're struggling with the move, if you fail it 2 or 3 times in a row, we'll start to cue these verb arcs. And people won't even notice they're there almost, and they'll immediately start dancing the dance better. So you can just hear a few of those.
Cross, back, hip.
That's our choreographer, Tova.
Cross, back, hip.
Pitch down, because she didn't like the sound of her voice.
Grind, grind, stomp.
Let's try the other way.
So this was an exciting system. This system was pretty broad in terms of its move complexity. You had to sort of be on the beat to an extent, but it was pretty flexible. We liked the language, and this is when we finally got rid of any representation of you on screen as well. One of the things we learned pretty early on with Dance Central, as I was saying earlier, is like the more we show you, the more confused you are, and the less awesome you feel. If we tell you perfect, and you see someone on screen dancing, like one of our choreographers, you think to yourself, man, I must look just like them. And if you see yourself next to them, you're like, oh man. So at that point, we pretty much settled on what we believed was going to be Dance Central. And so we mounted a final prototype sort of just to sell the thing to the team that had been assembled to make the game, to Beyonce's Crazy in Love. And here we're refining the iconography a little bit more with these impact iconography, and we have rest beats. We're sort of refining the depth of that language and the expressivity of these silhouettes almost. And did a little bit of art polish, but the artists at Harmonix hate it when I show these prototypes. So again, similar move complexity. Like I said, our language has these little poofs and flourishes that make each move a little bit more unique. So as you're seeing them out of the corner of your eye, you're like, oh, that's definitely brush off. I see the clouds on that guy's shoulder. We added a crowd meter like Rock Band to give you a set of global feedback, and really pumped up the gold on the icons as best we could. And we made the tutorial a little more explicit.
Snap,
in previous
2,
instances,
3, down. Snap, 2.
we wouldn't really give you an opportunity just to watch the move and try it out without being detected. And that turned out to be something that people wanted an opportunity to do. So we give people opportunity, look at it 4 times, okay, try it 4 times, look at it 4 times, try it 4 times. And that worked pretty well for us, especially for people who were excited about the prospect of doing the linear dance. So if we look over the course of the process, we vacillated pretty wildly from the extremes of a dance game with the sort of Rock Band-esque prototype, the early prototyping direction, and pushing all the way close to real dance, and ending up somewhere, where it is limited. It's not able to do, say, like a Merce Cunningham ballet piece, but it was able to take in a lot of the hip hop music we wanted and a lot of the core dances from that place. So. This is a very happy moment of my life because I've been doing all this work for 6 months, and we actually got the project green lit. So at this point, we knew a lot. We knew the things that were happening with dancing culture. We knew the music we wanted, and we had this sort of Deus Ex Machina moment where Microsoft gave us a call, and they're like, "We have this thing, and you have to see it." And we were like, "Holy shit, we have this game, and you have to see it." We'd refine our audience, and left the wallflowers on the wall. Pretty good on our move complexity. We made a big change in our language as we started developing Dance Central. We found that this very per beat based feedback was having people look at this iconography instead of the dancer and believe that they really only had to do those moves on the beat and not the whole dance. And there's a lot that was happening in between these icons. So we went to a more representational, memorizable system. So in each one of these instances, you can see some particular advances to our technology, if you will. The limb that's going to move first is always highlighted in the icon. So in Talk to the Hand, you're going to step right with your right foot. Likewise, move your body, you're going to sweep out with your right foot. And making these things simple and singular and not loading the feedback into them allowed them to be just a pure cueing system. We took all the feedback off the icons, all the feedback off of the crowd meter, and integrated it into the venue because we found people's initial experiences with this game, they're sort of cone of vision was centered directly on the dancer, and it took about 4 or 5 playthroughs before they'd notice anything else around it. So we decided we have to load it directly onto the dancer. So the thing you see under Mo, one of our characters, is the spotlight. So you're getting this constant, almost analog feedback as to how you're doing. That's pushing you along in the same way that each icon flashing its color was doing. However, it's not explicitly distracting. We also have a moment where I think it'll happen. Yeah, the whole venue transforms into this neon nightclub and you start doing well. So we made all the transformations around you and or like around parts of the dancer's body so that it was obvious even if you weren't looking to the periphery of the screen. And plenty of people play the game for days and days without even noticing that there is a flashcard queuing system. And at this point in time, we still really didn't know what detection was going to be like. We didn't know what a tutorial was going to be like. I can dig in at some point to the design of our tutorial process. I'm not really at liberty to speak about the work I did on our detection process, but that's prototyping Dance Central. You guys got 2 talks in one.
It sounds like a lot of it is just having a lot of people who understand what works, but are there any specific methods?
We did have questionnaires at the end of each one of our play tests. A fair amount of it was our own intuition and our own dissatisfaction with each one of the prototypes. What ended up being our major heuristic was just this like, is it real dance? Like I would say a lot, and can it Soldier Boy? Can it crank that? And having a very explicit goal in that right allowed us to see what was going to succeed or fail at teaching that. So like some of the best metrics were really just, did people walk away with a knowledge of the dance, and was it an overall positive experience? And the rest of it was just our drive to make it better than that.
So I guess the evaluators had to know how to dance, or at least had to know how to know something.
Yeah. So I mean, we had a choreographer for prototyping. We hired a different set of choreographers for production, but between her and myself, we're able to see if someone's learning, and if someone's trying to learn and the system's not letting them learn, people are pretty loud about it. And the other nice thing is we're testing all Harmonix employees, so they have a particular tact in relationship to this. It's like, I don't want to make that. So they'll give you their brutal, honest feedback, and it can be really useful. But once we actually started going into full production and making the real thing, we needed to get a little bit more broad than that, because we were finding that if we made a game for game developers dancing, it was going to be incredibly easy and lots of like stepping and fist pumping. And we wanted to do something with hips. We wanted to do something that could accept a lot more forms of dance. And so we brought in all sorts of people. So we have a good relationship with the Boston Boys and Girls Club, and brought those kids in. And that was a real transformative moment for the team, because like these like easy, medium, hard levels, and like hard levels were notorious. Like there were like 4 people on the team that can do the hard levels. This girl, she's 13 years old. She walks up to the system and she's like literally first time through the thing, it's just doing everything and scoring flawlessly. And we're like, oh my God, I didn't know our detection worked. And it is still one of the unique things watching people interact with it. Like I was at E3 all last week showing off new choreography, and we have taught a whole bunch of people to dance in such a peculiar way.
Yeah. So what else, we know these are people that use this that are interested in dancing, but what else can you tell us about them in terms of demographics or your kind of target audience or profile of user?
As we're making any of our titles, we're thinking a lot about making the game appealing to a broad set of audiences, but also have our core audience. And I think we see our core audience as a youth audience, and we see our core audience as people who are consuming that other dance culture that we're seeing as like the So You Think You Can Dance and the America's Next Best Dance Crew, and sort of try and give those people an experience of not only observing dance but participating in it. And that is one of the goals. But the surprising thing in the reaction to the game has been how broad our user base actually is. I think there was some thought internally that we'd release the game and it would be 80% women that bought the game, and no men would ever play it, and things like that. And we've actually seen that like very high adoption rate, and all sorts of different users really getting deep into this stuff. And we have what I would consider very traditionally femininely gendered routines, and we have these awesome dudes who are taking their YouTube videos and like twisting the moves in just the way that makes them comfortable. And I think one of the nice things about our detection system is it's not so nuanced as to disallow you from adding your own personal spin to the move. So I think between that, the broad musical content, everything from disco to modern day hip hop, we were able to enfranchise a lot of people. There's a really cute video that I watched the other day of this girl, and she's what I call score attacking Dance Central. She's trying to get the best score possible. Her grandmother walks in and like doesn't know she's videotaping herself for YouTube, and grandma's like looks at the screen and starts jerking.
I was curious because the verbal cues came so late in the process, and that would seem to me to be, I don't want to use the word natural, but part of like the traditional process of teaching people. Was there a reason why that was so late?
We were struggling with tutorial. We were trying to balance our time between building the new game mechanics and building a robust tutorial. We knew we'd have to build the robust tutorial at some point, but we saw that as sort of the white whale, like a fun tutorial.
So that doesn't actually occur as feedback during play. That's like separate if you're choosing it as tutorial.
Yeah.
So you wouldn't get verbal during regular play.
There's no verbal cues during regular play. It's a dynamically triggered thing as you're going through the break it down process, which is part tutorial, part game, I guess. It's like learn it as fast as you can. Yeah.
First of all, congratulations. It's an incredible game. And one thing, talking about the tutorial, and we can't talk about every aspect of the game, but as a player, certain games, you reach a certain level and you either have the skill to continue or you don't, and at that point you stop playing or you only play the level that you're comfortable. Right? And I think where you took it above and beyond just to break it down was, I don't remember the other feature, but where you can slow it down to half speed. Mm-hmm. So even as you're getting to moves that are more complex than you kind of normally be able to do, you can slow it down even further, so you can kind of break past your own boundaries.
Yeah, and we're focusing on that experience and trying to make it a little bit more flexible this time around for Dance Central 2. Focus really on breadth, trying to get you to learn the whole song in Dance Central 1, but in Dance Central 2 you can do things like pick the moves that you want. The game will actually dynamically tell you things that you have been doing poorly, and use voice commands to do all the sorts of flow modulations, slowing things down or moving on or whatever else. It's a much improved tool. Yeah.
So I haven't played Dance Central, but Guitar Hero has this funky property where people who are good at guitar hate it. At least the ones I've heard from, because they're forced to dumb down their play style. Does Dance Central have any gaps in the spectrum between total beginner and, awesome ballerina, blah, blah?
Our hard routines are hard enough that, so we did a Connect promotion with Justin Bieber of all people, and he has had the most absolutely amazing and actually touching stage show. It's like really cool to see him. But his dancers, they saw the game. They're these people who have made a life of dancing, and looking at the hard levels, and they're like, ooh, I'm gonna have to work on that. So we think we're pushing a difficulty curve such that, that the pros want to play it and want to have fun with it, and well, it's not going to, push the boundaries of their abilities. So we aren't having you do like floor work, break dancing, and spins and whatever else. But it's fun enough, and the high level play is challenging enough, and the routines are varied enough that we've seen a lot of professional dancers have a really good time with it. I mean, all of our routines are done by professional dancers, and they make them on hard, and they sort of envision that level for them. And we take a whole bunch of moves out and call that medium, and take even more out and call that easy. So there's sort of a nice process. If you don't want to go through tutorials, you can just do easy, and then actually you know a bunch of medium, and then you know a bunch of hard, and you can learn that way as well.
Here's another question when you're done with Dance Central. For the Rock Band series, you entered the process like for the third game, is that right?
I started working at Harmonix during the development of Rock Band 1. I spent the summer before that shipped in southern China in a factory.
Can you tell us anything about the types of improvements you were able to make in the peripherals?
Yeah, between Rock Band 1 and Rock Band 2, it was a lot of materials improvements, and the Rock Band 1 instruments were sort of notoriously loud and annoying. So we did a lot of materials research to try and find affordable play surfaces for the drums. Was one of the big improvements we made between Rock Band 1 and Rock Band 2. Likewise with the guitar, we did a lot of aesthetic polish, gave it more of a real guitar look and feel. But we also spent a long time with the fret button feel and the strum bar feel. We went a different direction with the strum bar than other guitar peripherals had gone, and we wanted to refine that experience for Rock Band 2. So we limited, this is really specific and nerdy, but we limited the travel range of the strum bar by about 4 degrees on either side, and that felt a lot tighter. And we did a fair amount of testing to find that exact right angle. Then a lot of the more exciting and challenging work happened around Rock Band 3 and trying to develop a guitar that could sense your left hand and be a real guitar and sense drumming at the same time, and is sort of unprecedented thing that we were able to put together. Likewise, making a sort of very much like a real guitar, but still made out of plastic guitar, offered its own set of challenges. And the interesting thing there is, or working on that type of hardware is, like pennies count. So you get to be creative with very small pieces of electronics, and you have to limit your materials incredibly. So it can be really frustrating at times because you know that there's a really easy technical solution. It's just expensive. And a lot of that is just sort of like learning how to make fun interfaces that are going to last for a long time on the cheap. I think toys are sort of, you play with them 3 times, and then if they're broken, no one really cares. But we're making actually like precision HDI devices that people expect to get every single note. We have people who want to perfect a song. And so to get that level of reliability in all the peripherals was a really big challenge. One of the things we ended up doing was moving to like a magnetic reed switch solution for the strum bar as well, for the Rock Band 2 series, because very little physical wear and tear. And people are pretty brutal to those instruments.
We're about out of time. So thank you, everybody.